Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first New England State Authorization Reciprocity webinar. We have a majority of our attendees here today, so we're actually going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kylie Danchase-Curtis, and I'm the project coordinator for Sara at the New England Board of Higher Education. Thank you for joining us on an early Friday morning. During this webinar, we wanted to provide a current understanding and update of the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement. For some of you, this will be a review, and for others, it will be a new discussion. At any time during the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to type it in, and we will try and get to a majority of the questions. Alrighty, so we'll get started. I just wanted to give you a brief background on Sara. Sara developed out of discussions between the President's Forum and the Council of State Governments. Then, as a combined effort from all stakeholders, the Commission on Regulation of Post-Secondary Distance Education was created, which really is the basis for each regional agreement. And these efforts were founded by SHIO and the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. And this was chaired by the former Secretary of Education, Richard Riley. And if you fast forward to today, the national and regional implementation of Sara is the funding is provided by the Lumina Foundation. So Sara is a state-level process for a more efficient delivery of distance education. It's the most effective means to deal with quality and integrity issues that have arisen with distance education across the nation. The two key components of Sara are its cost-effective structure for institutions and its quality assurance, which we will discuss later in the presentation. The state authorization, scramble, and contemplation of reciprocity are the result of four important developments in higher education in the last few years. These are the diversification of degree programs and student populations, the exponential growth of education offered online, inconsistent program quality, aggressive recruiting strategies, and financially unstable institutions. And in 2010, the U.S. Department of Education stepped in to make sure institutions were authorizing and states were regulating. As institutions seek authorization from every other state or territory where they hope to serve students, they run into a few key issues. High initial and renewal fees. Also, application and fees change in some states even when only minor changes occur at the institutional program level. There's many person hours to obtain and maintain these authorizations as well. Institutions are turning away students where institutions are not able to authorize, which has a larger impact on small programs and schools. There is also a current lack of data on participation in programs and numbers of students. And there is a lot of confusion over jurisdiction to resolve complaints. So under Sara, institutions will voluntarily seek approval from their designated authority in their home states if they have joined Sara, and the appointed state agency will then regulate those institutions with regard to the export of online education across state lines to host states. The governance structure is set up so implementation is carried out through the four regional higher education compacts. This is SREB, WICHE, MEC, and NEVI. Then we also have the National Council for Sara, which consists of 22 members from regional compact presidents, accreditors, regulators, state governments, and SHIOs. Catherine Dodge and Patricia O'Brien, as well as our compact president, Michael Thomas, all serve as the Northeast regional representatives to this National Council. The National Council will work with compacts to ensure comprehensive national coverage as well as maintain financial support. Each compact also has a regional steering committee that will help to approve the states on a biannual basis and decide whether they meet requirements set forth in the regional agreement. So I wanted to briefly touch base on the benefits to the institutions. Sara will benefit all sectors of higher education first and foremost by reducing overall costs associated with distance authorization processes. With Sara, there will also be more consistency across the nation for coordination, appeals, financing, and data. State regulators will essentially switch from regulating imports to certifying their exports. Fewer students will get turned away from online programs across state borders, and this will give smaller schools a chance to really compete in the online education market. Sara provides a consistent definition and clear path of complaint resolution, and also more compliance set by these standards. As to benefits for students, students around the nation will now have more access to online education. Once an institution is authorized to offer their distance education courses through Sara, they will use a symbol on the website or a standard statement to inform students of their participation in the Sara agreement. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to our president, Michael Thomas, and he's going to get into the details regarding the roles of participating states and institutions and fees as well. So without further ado, here is Michael Thomas.
Great, thanks Kylie, and thanks to all of you who have taken time to join us today. We'll share with you at the end of our conversation a web link that will direct you to a variety of resources that are available, and we would encourage you to look at some of the documents that we've shared there. One in particular outlines a lot of what's been shared with you today and a lot of the detailed information related to the role of participating states and institutions. As you are likely aware, Sara is a fully voluntary network for collaboration and for reciprocity. In the first instance, it's voluntary for states. States are not required to participate. If they choose to do so, there are certain conditions of participation, which they will be working with NEBI to demonstrate ability to provide. And then it's secondarily voluntary for institutions. So again, institutions within a state are not required to participate and can choose to do so based on certainly their involvement in online learning as well as their circumstances related to state authorization. Let me say a few words about the roles of participating states. The core conditions really for state participation are fairly straightforward. The state needs to be essentially authorized to participate. In some instances, that will require legislative language to permit a state to participate in the reciprocity and to comply with all the conditions and standards related thereto. States will also be asked to designate a lead state Sara entity. We recognize that within many states, there are multiple state entities that are involved in both the authorization of institutions, the regulation of online learning, as well as the assurance of consumer protection and complaint resolution. That can continue to be the case, but states will need to demonstrate that there is a single lead and contact agency for this work and demonstrate, in essence, the sort of shared roles and responsibilities between applicable partners within the state to ensure that all of the requirements of the Sara agreement are met. The process as it will unfold, states will apply directly to the New England Board of Higher Education. This will be true nationally in each region across the nation. Interested states will make application to NEBI, and in essence, their application will demonstrate the items that I've just shared with you. In essence, their authorization to participate, the designation of a lead agency and appropriate partners, and then in essence, their ability to comply with the requirements of the agreement, and in particular to execute the functions related to the annual review of in-state institutions for the purposes of Sara participation. And those applications will be received by NEBI in January of 2014, so just a few weeks away. And we've been in contact with each of the New England states, obviously, to share with them the information related to this process and a final timeline as we complete our online submission system will be forthcoming shortly to each of the New England states. Let me just pause here quickly to remind you that you're welcome to submit questions throughout this conversation, and I encourage you to do so. We'll also leave time here at the end for you to share questions. And I would just quickly state that, again, if you haven't consulted NEBI's website, there is a Sara agreement there that details in fairly clear order, I believe, the nature of, as I said, the state application and review process. Let me just say a few words quickly about the roles of then participating institutions. Once a state has applied to NEBI, its application been reviewed and endorsed by NEBI's Regional Steering Committee, which is now being composed, and all of the members of that committee will be made public in the next week or so. That committee will essentially work with the state to resolve any issues and then make an endorsement to the NEBI board. And the NEBI board will act formally to, in essence, accept New England states into participation. I'll also note that it's possible for the 3 states, and I believe, I guess, territories as well, to participate in reciprocity, even if they don't currently belong to one of the regional compacts. So specifically, near our region, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania are all eligible to participate. They may choose to participate with NEBI, they may choose to participate with another of the 3 regionals rather, but they will be able to do so, and through the payment of a $50,000 annual fee, be essentially able to participate as sort of adjunct members to the compact and full participants in the SARA process. And they will also go through the same review process. The review process at the state level will be essentially renewed or reviewed on a biannual basis, so every 2 years, to certify that states continue to be authorized and able to execute the duties related to SARA participation. As it relates to institutions, really the fundamental premise, as we've discussed in the past, and I believe earlier in this conversation, is essentially what we call homestead authorization. Once a state has been accepted, it will then be able to begin receiving and reviewing applications from home state institutions who would like to participate in SARA. And in essence, the largest sort of portion of, I guess, information required through this process will be, of course, from the institutions, the entities that need to demonstrate themselves able to participate in this agreement and meet the standards and the required specifications. We've detailed here on the slide, as you note, that there are sort of 3 primary areas of sort of demonstration. The first is, again, academic quality, which really is demonstrated through accreditation, through an accreditor that's recognized by the U.S. Department of Education, as well as compliance with CRAC guidelines. This is a set of guidelines related to online learning that were developed through the shared collaboration of the regional accreditors across the United States. Second, they'll be asked to demonstrate the ability to provide consumer protection and complaint resolution. And then lastly, institutional financial stability and responsibility. We'll note that all 3 of these areas are areas in which institutions already certify either through a regional accreditation or other accreditation or through their participation in Title IV to the U.S. Department of Education. And this reflects the fact that SARA is really built upon the notion of using, to the greatest extent possible, existing indicators of quality and compliance and consumer protection, so that we address one of the challenges of state authorization, which is sort of the burden of compliance and demonstration of information. And then it's when essentially the first state institution, so to speak, is approved by its lead state entity, its designated state entity. That's when the interstate reciprocity will be active for the state and for its other institutions. Institutions will be required to get authorization on an annual basis from their home state lead entity, and we expect that will help to continue to assure the full compliance with the measures that have been designated. And institutions will pay a fee based on enrollment, and we'll share that with you in a moment, to the National SARA Council for participation. I'll also note that states, if they choose to do so, are allowed under the National SARA Agreement to charge a fee to their in-state institutions that apply for review and SARA authorization. As mentioned here are the fees. In essence, an annual fee paid by the institution to the National Coordinating Board of Sara. As you note here on the slide, it's essentially based on total enrollment. Some have asked the question as to why not based on online enrollment. As you can appreciate, how institutions define online enrollment varies a little bit at this point, and so for simplicity's sake, it's been essentially pinned to total enrollment, and you can see there's sort of an incremental basis, 2,000 for institutions up to 2,500 students, 4,000 for institutions with 25 to roughly 10,000 students, 2,500 to 10,000 students, and then over 10,000, $6,000 per institution on an annual basis. And those fees, as I mentioned, go to the NC Sara board to support its function and to also help support the regional entities and their work and their regional steering committees. In terms of timeline, so in essence, in November of this year, the National Coordinating Board for State Authorization Agreements was formed. It's a 21-member board. As mentioned, we are 3 individuals representing New England in addition to myself. The opportunity for states to begin to submit applications will be coming in late January of 2014, so just a few weeks away. And we expect that subsequent to that process, though it may take 60 days or so, institutions will be able to begin applying to their states as well. We suspect that nationally that may occur as early as February. In New England, depending on how things unfold, I would say that's probably possible, but might be a little bit later, just depending on the timeline for states. And we'll keep you posted on that. But as mentioned, NEBI will begin receiving applications from states towards the middle to end of January of this coming year. And so as soon as that process transpires and also transpires in the other regions, institutions will be able to begin applications. So it's fully expected that institutions will be able to apply, if not, sort of mid to late first quarter of 2014, certainly into second quarter 2014, with an eye towards the July 2014 sort of deadline that's proposed around compliance with state authorization through the U.S. Department of Education. In terms of what you and your organization might do, in essence, you can help us help to better understand how it is we can assist you and your colleagues in both understanding and reviewing Sara. As mentioned, we've been in detailed conversations with state entities around the region and entities that would likely perhaps play the role as a lead state designate entity. We've also been in conversation with institutions, both public and independent, throughout the region, as well as their sort of organizations, their sectoral or segmental groups or associations. We will continue to be in conversation and really invite you, if you will, to reach out to NEBI to let us know how it is we might help to further the conversation in your state. We have found from our experience today that it's often useful to bring together both institutions and state agencies. That's happened, I think, with some success so far in the region, and we'd be happy to do the same in your state if that's timely and you can give us some additional feedback as to how that can happen. We'd certainly encourage you from the institutional standpoint to reach out to your sort of existing state agencies and entities to let them know of your interest and desire to participate or to know more and to better understand how it is the state will address and respond to this opportunity. Obviously expressing support to those decision makers who are involved to let them know of the demand that exists amongst your institutions. Again, we're very anxious to have further conversations. We're happy to speak with people directly through appointment or meeting. We're spending a fair amount of time in the New England states on the road, so there are many opportunities for us, I believe, to connect with you. We'd also refer you to, again, as I mentioned earlier, our NEBI website, nebi.org/Sara. This page includes a variety of documents. It includes, in fact, the detailed document, which is the sort of basis for the reciprocity agreement. It's called the New England State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement, or NESARA. It details, in I think fairly clear fashion, the responsibilities of states, which I've summarized for you here today, the responsibility of institutions, which we've also mentioned. It notes the responsibilities of the regional compacts like NEVI, and it also says something about sort of the role of accrediting entities in this process as well. It provides, I believe, some useful checklists and sort of templates for both states and institutions to begin thinking about what it is they will need to demonstrate in the process of their either state or institutional application for SARA in terms of the areas we mentioned: academic quality and integrity, consumer protection and complaint resolution, and institutional financial stability and sustainability. With that, we note here that we have a variety of questions. So for those of you who are here on the line, we will work to sort of work in a stepwise fashion through these questions.
Someone did ask, when is the deadline in January for applying? There is no deadline. It is completely voluntary. So we will have the state process set up in January to go online and kind of submit the application by the end. And then once your state does voluntarily join SARA, pretty much the institutional process will be set up right away. So institutions should be able to apply once their states are ready.
So it really is an open-ended process, really. There's no particular deadline, but we will give you sort of open dates by which the process will begin. And it's, in the first instance, it's mentioned states will begin to apply to NEVI. We suspect that once the state approval process is through, states will likely be able to essentially respond directly to their home state institutions to give them specific dates as to when the application process within the state will begin.
All right. Will the PowerPoint be on the website? Yes, and we're actually recording the PowerPoint as well. So I'm not exactly quite sure how I'm going to post that, but it will be available on the website amongst the other informational materials as well.
There's a question here as to whether for-profit institutions are eligible for inclusion. The answer is yes. As is noted in the New England SARA document on the website, eligible institutions for participation in SARA include the following. One, you have to be a post-secondary institution. So obviously it doesn't include high schools, it's just post-secondary institutions. You actually have to be an institution with essentially an OPE ID from the U.S. Department of Education. So it includes public, nonprofit privates, as well as for-profit institutions. You need to be a degree-granting institution, so in essence you grant at the associate level or above. You have to be an accredited institution through an accrediting entity that's authorized and recognized by the U.S. Department of Education to accredit, and it has to be one that's accredited to be able to accredit distance education programs. And then lastly, you have to be authorized in your home state to offer post-secondary degrees. So whatever state you've designated as your home state or primary legal domicile, you have to be essentially authorized by that state. So those are the conditions for participation, and I think you understand that that would include for-profit institutions. Yeah, I think so the question here is the cost for participation. I think we reviewed that. So there is an institutional annual fee to be paid. We detailed that in the slides. And then as mentioned, it is possible for states to charge a fee if they choose to do so. And that again will be entirely up to states to, if they choose to recover any costs related to their participation and their authorization of home state participating entities, they may do so. So obviously that'll be something that will have to emerge in your conversations with the whatever state entity is designated in your home state.
Someone had asked, how will participating institutions handle enrollment of students from non-participating states? Unfortunately, you can only take part in the agreement if your state is part of the agreement. Hold on, sorry.
Yeah, so in essence, if SARA works within a given network, if you have students in a state that is not part of the network, then you will be subject to whatever existing approval processes exist in that state. So SARA will only benefit you within the existing network of states. So if you have students enrolling in a non-participant state, you'll still be subject to whatever existing state laws there, and you'll, as I think it's been seen by institutions make a decision as to whether or not you go through that process and just essentially comply with whatever existing state law or regulation are there. And if that doesn't answer your question, feel free to send us a follow-up on that.
If the institution is certified via the NEBI process for regional reciprocity, does this reciprocity apply throughout the country, or must it seek certification in other regions? No, it does certify for the whole country. NEBI is just moving this agreement forward within its region. That's how NC Sara has designated the Sara authorization process. We're really going to work to create the agreement within our region, but yes, you are a part of the national agreement, so you would be authorized nationally in other states.
And just to make another quick clarification, number one is that, the question is if an institution is certified by the NEBI process, and just to make the process clear, institutions will be certified through their home state authorization process. So NEBI actually won't be certifying the institutions, but NEBI will be certifying the home states, if you will, so that they can then certify their home state institutions for participation. I'll also just quickly note, too, that there is, amongst the 4 regional agreements, amongst the 4 regional compacts, there are 4 Sara agreements, and those have been reviewed by the National Council for State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements, the NC Sara Board. They have been reviewed to be found wholly equivalent on matters that are needed to establish interstate and essentially what we would consider nationwide reciprocity. And also just a last clarification, the Sara agreement and network will be nationwide insofar as institutions choose within their given regions to participate. So the 4 regions really will encompass the nation, but it will be dependent on the participations of states. So it will be nationwide insofar as it continues to grow and to spread. And our sense is that we hope that within the next year to 18 months we'll have at least 50% of U.S. states participating, and that will continue to grow over time.
Someone had asked, can you clarify how internships are viewed in Sara? This would fall under activities that would not trigger physical presence requirements, and that's actually in our New England agreement. It's on page 5 if you guys want to go back and review that afterwards. But we kind of had to hone down on the physical presence requirements. So we had said that experiential learning opportunities such as clinical, practicum, residency, or internship do not trigger physical presence if the institution has already obtained all the necessary professional and licensure approvals necessary, if any, to conduct the learning opportunity in the state, and if only 10 students from each institution are physically present simultaneously at a single field site, and there is no multi-year contract between the institution and the field site. There's also a side note to that. We had noted that physical presence is not triggered for short courses or seminars where 20 classroom hours or less or the equivalent thereof, and also full-term courses in which the instructor and students physically meet together for no more than 2 meetings totaling less than 6 hours. This standard was set by the National Council, so it was something that was agreed upon across the nation.
And we would refer you, as Kylie mentions, to this document. Certainly sort of one of the key, poles or sort of linchpins, if you will, elements of Sara is, one, whether or not a state will choose to accept this nationally determined definition of physical presence and things that are or not triggers for physical presence. So that's sort of primary number 1. And then number 2, whether or not an institution in its provision of online learning does so in means that don't trigger physical presence as defined. So we would certainly suggest not only that state entities and agencies continue to review that carefully, but institutions do the same. As Kylie mentions on page 5 of the New England Sara Agreement, which you can see posted on the website, nevi.org/Sara. And that's really, I think, probably the first thing that states and institutions need to look at to see whether or not they can accept that definition, and then if so, obviously, whether or not they would choose to participate in Sara. The next question is asking, is there a clear definition of distance education as related to state authorization? And again, is there a clear threshold for low residency or hybrid programs at a point that they are considered a distance education program subject to the rule? And I think we just answered that question. And again, we just refer you to page 5 there and the definition of physical presence, which in essence allows institutions to recruit, to advertise through traditional means, to have contractual arrangements within the state, to provide courses to military institutions, to have faculty of various types, mentors and tutors and other personnel residing in the state, to have field trips in the state, proctored exams, to have and operate a server or other electronic device. As Kylie mentioned, short courses, 29 classroom hours or less, or to have full-term courses in which there are 2 course meetings, no more than 6 hours total. And then lastly, as it relates to experiential learning opportunities, clinicals, practicums, residencies, internships, etc. And those are clearly, again, outlined, and we would refer you to those and for your review and further consideration. We're certainly happy to answer questions that might come up in that regard.
The next question was, some states require admission reps to be licensed in their state and require a fee for licensing. Will those fees continue to exist in Sara's states?
So no. Again, it in essence it allows you to continue to recruit in normal fashion. States in their agreement will, for the purposes of Sara, in essence say that they will not require any further fees. This is again detailed in the New England Sara Agreement.
Would individual colleges need to apply, or could a system of colleges, the community college system of New Hampshire, apply on behalf of all colleges within a system? The individual schools have to apply to the Sara agreement. They would apply directly to the state.
And the distinction here is that if you really look at it from the standpoint of accreditation and or whether or not your institution has its own individual institution ID through Title IV and the U.S. Department of Education. So it's our understanding that most institutions within, for example, a community college system in New Hampshire and elsewhere in the region are individually accredited and all have OPE ID numbers. And so in essence, the process will be individually institution oriented. So yes, there's a question about, said a fee was $50,000. So to make a clarification here, I think we've outlined for you sort of 2 primary fees. One is what the institution will pay annually to the NC Sara entity. Again, that's enrollment based, ranges from essentially $2,000 to $6,000 based on enrollment. The second possibility is that a state, again, if it chose, could charge a fee to its home state institution to cover the cost of the annual authorization or review process. I did previously mention the notion of a $50,000 fee. That only would apply to a state that is not currently part of a regional compact for it to participate only for the purposes of Sara. And the specific example we give you, again, would be New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, I believe Puerto Rico, and some of the territories. They do not currently participate as formal members of a regional compact. They have the opportunity to do so as affiliate members for the purposes of Sara, and they, because their states don't pay annual dues or assessments or fees to any of the regionals, they would be required to pay a $50,000 annual fee. So again, the $50,000 annual fee only applies to states that are not currently members of a regional compact.
Someone had asked, is this agreement to include non-online education that could cross state borders, i.e. nursing clinical placements. This agreement is just for distance education classes, and there had been discussion about clinical placements, but Sarah's just not ready to address the clinical issue at this point in time.
Yeah, so again, refer to page 5 of the New England Sara agreement. Again, this agreement really is primarily focused on the delivery of programs that are wholly or primarily online. We've noted, I think, the exceptions and/or dimensions that would not trigger physical presence. But really, the essence of, if you think about it from the standpoint of sort of how state authorization currently occurs, majority of states have some sort of a physical presence definition. In this instance, states will be required to accept, for the purposes of reciprocity only, this new definition of physical presence. And while it may change and be altered over time, I think it's pretty set as it is now. One of the benefits of Sara is that it creates a national structure through which we can continue to address sort of emerging issues and models of distance education. And we think that's an important benefit to states and institutions. Sort of the point that we're at right now is noted in the document in terms of physical presence. But if a state is interested in crossing state borders for the purpose of essentially education models that constitute physical presence, then they'll just be subject to the existing sort of approval process and requirements in whatever state they're trying to work in. And it's also perhaps just a quick qualification too. So as mentioned, most states, and it's true in New England states, there are existing definitions of physical presence. And in some states, this will require them to revise their definition slightly, perhaps provide a slightly larger set of activities to be able to participate and not trigger physical presence. But insofar as a state does trigger physical presence, then insofar as an institution does trigger physical presence, either by the state's definition or the Sara definition, that institution is then required to comply with whatever state regulation exists. So only the definition of physical presence provided only applies for the purposes of Sara. And to the extent that an institution departs from that, they'll be subject in their home state and elsewhere to whatever existing regulation exists.
Someone had asked, will institutions that were established under legislative charter outside of the purview of the state of BHE be allowed to join the NEBI-SARA compact independently? The answer to that question is yes, they will be, as long as their state has joined the agreement voluntarily as well.
And to put a little finer point on that, so as is true in New England and elsewhere throughout the nation, there are institutions that don't fall for one reason or another, some historical, some for other reasons, under the purview of a state authorizing entity. As we mentioned, all participating states will have to designate a lead Sara agency and entity. It will be required to authorize review on an annual basis all institutions that participate through that state's Sara agreement or participation. So institutions that are currently exempt for any reason would, if they wanted to participate in Sara, have to seek only for the purposes of Sara authorization on an annual basis from whatever designated agency the state will have in terms of its Sara efforts.
Someone had asked whether all the institutions would be required to identify themselves to the states in which they operate as participating or non-participating Sara institutions. Yes, they will be. One of the finer points of the Sara agreement is that you will be able to identify all these states, and we're going to require that institutions will put like a little notice on their website or just say that they're participating in the Sara agreement.
One of the benefits of the Sara network is that we will have much greater transparency and, frankly, information and data on what is going on around the nation in terms of online and distance education. So yes, institutions will be known through the Sara Network. There'll be public listings of institutions that are, of states and institutions that are Sara authorized. And we also expect that this will also be a venue and platform whereon specific information related to consumer protection and student complaints and complaint resolution will be available as well. I'll just quickly add that obviously one of the primary concerns of states is consumer protection. And one of the benefits of the Sara network is that if a New England state is dealing with a state resident who has been, in anyone's opinion, wrongly dealt with by an out-of-state institution that's part of a Sara state and the Sara agreement, then there will be sort of a direct path from this new participating New England state to that other participating Sara state for the purposes of resolution and for follow-up on the student concern. So this provides really a network and a platform through which consumer protection is going to be owned by a state and have clear responsibilities related thereto. And other Sara states will have a very direct path to be able to work with that other member state to make sure that resolution takes place. We think this is a really important part of the agreement. Also note that one of the roles of the NC Sara board, so NEBI will work on an annual, sort of a biannual basis rather, to make sure that its New England participating states are essentially complying with all of the standards and requirements as explained in the agreement. The NC Sara board will also be working to make sure that across the various regions we have sort of confidence and assurance that all states are working together to apply the standards and requirements in an equitable and equal fashion. So it really will be working to establish this whole notion of trust and sort of equal understanding and execution of protocols, standards, and procedures so that there is a strong basis for full reciprocity and equal state responsibility and compliance.
Someone had asked if we were aware of the timelines in the other regions for states being certified as Sara states and institutions gaining authorization through Sara. I'd have to say across the board, the regions are spread. There's some states who are ready and they've proposed legislation and they're ready to go for this coming year. A majority, all the regions do have the processes set up in which to receive state applications. It is that within each region, all the states are at different timelines at this point in time.
And in terms of the sort of the date by which the various regions, including NEBI, will be open to accepting applications from states really mirrors what we shared with you early. So it'll be essentially January 2014 when the regionals will be open to accepting state applications. And then, it's a little bit hard to predict from then exactly when states will be able to do so, but we would guess probably February. And we think that will be roughly true across the nation and the 4 regionals.
Someone had mentioned the time frame being driven by how soon they can get legislative authority to proceed. I'd like to let you know right now that Marshall Hill is working in with the Education Council in Washington, D.C., and they're working to kind of set up a checklist to creating legislation that would be necessary, if necessary, in your states. So that will come out hopefully within the next month, and that will definitely be helpful to guide states through exactly what is needed to change in order to participate in the Sara agreement.
And there's a note here also from Kathy Hilgendorf, who's participating on behalf of Vermont, noting that their process is underway and that they are working on the necessary legislative authorization and suggest that that process is moving forward successfully. That will be true, I believe, in most of the New England states, with the possible exception of New Hampshire, which during its recent sort of reorganization of post-secondary structures already sought sufficient authority from the state legislature. But with that exception, the other 5 New England states are likely to have to essentially enact legislative language. For those of you who are interested in that language, it's available on the website. But you would have to enact legislative language that would, in essence, authorize the state to participate and authorize the state to essentially cede for the purposes of Sara only to the requirements of the Sara agreement. So from a sort of a practical standpoint, there are sort of two key parts for state participation. And one, as we mentioned, is this authorizing language. And we know that several of the New England states are in the process of preparing to pursue that authorization during the upcoming legislative sessions, which will begin after the first of the year. So that's underway. And if you have questions about that, we're happy to answer state-specific questions or to refer you to individuals and agencies within states who are looking at these procedures and may give you a time frame if one exists in your respective New England state. And then sort of the second part too is then the state making applications. So, we know that there are several New England states that have recently gone through, if you will, governance reorganizations. And so there are many things in motions in the state in terms of relationships and duties and sort of laying down the paths by which these new governance structures and bodies and entities will work. And so there will be conversations as to what the state Sara lead agency is going to be. And in some states, it might be appropriate for states to, first of all, seek the legislative authorization. And then there may be, a second phase where shortly thereafter, then they work to figure out the state application. Ideally, they'd sort of be one step followed by a quick second step, but we also know that in some New England states, they're sort of working out some of those relationships that apply to how the state will then make application to NEVI. But for those states that have the ability to pursue legislative language in the coming session, we'd certainly encourage that. And then that opens the door to further conversation about how to go about essentially completing the application to NEVI and demonstrating whatever is required under the Sara agreement. Let's see, so there's a question around consumer protection complaint resolution as to whether or not what is required under Sara exceeds current state standards for investigating complaints. That may be true in some states. I don't necessarily think that's true in New England states. In essence, if you look at the detailed information that is shared in the New England Sara agreement, there is, beginning on page 9, a section 5, related to roles and responsibilities for participating institutions. And there it details, in essence, everything related to institutional sort of demonstration of fitness to participate. And it does address very specifically the notion of consumer protection and complaint resolution. As you know, institutions are required both as part of regional accreditation and other accreditation activities, as well as by Title IV participation, to demonstrate that they have these functions and capacities existent in their institutions. So we think it will be largely consistent with what institutions are already required to demonstrate. And then it will also sort of be linking into the larger home state sort of structure and apparatus, which in tandem with the institutions-based process will help to assure that we have adequate consumer protection and complaint resolution capacity in each of the participating states. But again, I think the general answer is that it should be consistent with what institutions are already required to do, but it will also be a topic for conversation in the state as to sort of the combination of institution and state process around this, and so that it is well articulated and delineated and can be nationally sort of demonstrated and known to provide, as I suggested a few minutes ago, this network whereby states can work directly with other Sara member states insofar as that's required to resolve any consumer protection or complaint resolution issues. But again, we refer you to the Sara document for that. We believe also that it's likely within the next few weeks there might be some additional templates or sort of guidelines or checklists being pulled together through the national Sara entity that will help institutions and states answer these questions as it relates to consumer protection. And I think, we'd all agree, certainly one of the sort of core drivers of the whole Sara effort really is this whole notion of greater sort of attention to consumer protection and building this national platform and set of links so far so that it's more effective for states to work in resolving issues that arise through the cross-state or cross-border delivery of learning.
So that concludes our presentation. I do have some,
Yeah, there's one other question that we'll address here as well, also related to consumer protection. Do you want to just read the question?
consumer protection under Sara means that the home state and other necessary parties will investigate and resolve claims of any dishonest or fraudulent activity by a provider, including giving false or misleading information to a student. And that is true, and that was in regards to whether or not it exceeds our current state standards. Consumer protection under Sara would set up the necessary means to resolve these claims. So first, if there was an issue with a student, they most often would go directly to the institution. So sometimes they wouldn't do that. Maybe say a student from Connecticut has an issue and they go to the Board of Higher Education. Well, now the Board of Higher Education has a means in which to say this student was wronged or not. We need to go directly to their institution. Say the student was from Connecticut and they were attending an online education course in California. The Board of Higher Education can go to California and say, this student was taking online distance education classes from one of your institutions. We need to resolve this. So they have a direct means to kind of resolve the complaint. They can go directly to the state, and then the state can go to the institution.
I'll just quickly note that, as institutions are already currently required to do, again through authorization and Title IV participation, institutions are required to have clear statements as to how, when, and where students can resolve concerns. Really within Sara, obviously the first course is going to be for a student to work through its institution. If an institution fails to meet those needs, then the student can go to its sort of designated Sara state entity, and insofar as that state is unable to resolve that situation, then it can be moved directly through the Sara Network to the home providing, to the entity in the other state. So, it really respects sort of what already exists, in the sense we expect students to resolve it primarily at the institution level, and then insofar as it moves up to the state level, then states will be able to work together to resolve any needs that exist of a student existing in your state or a provider is existing in your state. It provides that platform.
So we'd like to wrap up. I have my contact information here, as well as the NEBI website. Feel free to check it out, and please email me or call if you have any questions specifically related to Sara. I'll get to those questions as soon as possible. Thank you everyone for joining today. We look forward to future participation in webinars as well.
Thank you again. Certainly holiday wishes to those of you who celebrate the holidays. Thanks for your time. Again, we refer you, as Kylie mentioned, to the website, and we're happy both in the coming weeks and into the new year to respond to any specific questions that you have. We will likely continue to be doing sort of additional state-based conversations, and we will be posting and regularly disseminating the information of these conversations and further Sara meetings on our website, so that you, if you choose and have an interest, can participate. But again, please take full advantage of our offer to reach out to us directly. We'd be pleased to have direct and detailed conversations with any interested party. So thank you once again.
Thank you.